So none of these school board members who are running for office, there's 5 candidates who are running for office right now, none of them that I know about. I asked them specifically who their favorite educational theorists were. They didn't know their educational theorists. I specifically asked some of them these names, Horace Mann and John Dewey and B.F. Skinner. One had heard B.F. Skinner, and Margaret Wright, in her emails, she has a quote by B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner is a psychopath. He is a hardcore behavioralist, so he believes in oppressing the crap out of your kid to make them like a strong super person. So that's what his famous quote is, let's see what man can make out of man. And so he's a behavioralist, follows the behavior. He doesn't really care about the freedom of the person. He doesn't care about the freedom of the individual. All he gives a crap about is the behavior. He's a behavioralist. So just fashion. We have B.F. Skinner behavioralist. Margaret Wright, she just bloviates. And she has nothing but a bunch of jargon, and she's anti-democracy. So do not vote for Margaret Wright. That's the only person that I would advocate against. I'm in favor of Taylor Voss and Kenny O'Neill. Dottie Calhoun, whatever. I'm sure she represents a kind of demographic, but I wish she cared more about everybody's kids. And then Dennis Mays he's a nice man. He's got a good head on his shoulder. So I think they would actually bring something to the table. Whereas Margaret Wright, she's just pro-establishment, so anti-democracy. I just don't see, So if there was ranked choice voting, it would be Taylor Voss, and then it would be, Taylor Voss, and then Kenny O'Neill, then Dennis Mays, Dottie Calhoun, and then Margaret Wright. So she would be 5. One quick note with Michael Stapleton, he said that he would be in favor of a shelter, a homeless shelter, but he was going to try to get private interest involved in this. And I was like, okay, but will you do it? Will you do it? And then he kind of smiled, and he was like, yeah, I'll do that. And so, I was being somewhat playful, but it's essentially, do you have the political will to do it? So, you say you're for the shelter, and not everybody was in favor of a homeless shelter. I think Ed Brown was not in favor of a homeless shelter, but meanwhile, Michael Stapleton was. I'm thinking about the sales tax, too. The League of Women Voters give out this little ballot issues pamphlet, and so it's got some, $35 million tax, $35 million. We're going to give Jenny Paulson $35 million. $35 million over 5 years. We're going to give Jenny Paulson $35 million with to that in a second. What I wanted this to be about Horace Mann and John Dewey and B.F. Skinner. So B.F. Skinner is just a behavioralist. I feel like he looks at, kids as lab rats, and he just wants to sort of, let's see what we can fashion. Let's get them to do this, and let's get them to do that. And that's just not how I live my life. The way I live my life is the things I'm interested in, I go for it. That's what I'm curious about. And I find what I love to do, and then I keep doing that until eventually, hopefully, I'll make money doing it. And so that's what the school system should be doing for everybody since they've been 5. They should have been able to, follow the beat to their own drum since they were 5. Kids are smart. I taught my younger brother how to play chess when he was but 5 years old. So Horace Mann. Horace Mann is just the father of education. So none of the school board members know who the father of American education. Heard of the name, but couldn't say anything about him. The other one heard about B.F. Skinner. One loves B.F. Skinner, a behavioralist, but the founder of American schools, the father of American education, the father of the common school movement, is Horace Mann. And he was the first board of education, I think first superintendent. He professionalized teacher education. He wanted to foster an equal playing field for the masses. How did he convince Americans, freedom-loving Americans, to get universal education, to take everybody's kids and put them into school? And that was a big thing, right? Isn't that socialized education? It absolutely is, yep. So American education is socialized education. Michael Stapleton would be against socialized education. And when the public education system fails, you need some other charter, voucher, or homeschool. You got to do something else. Horace Mann wanted to create an equal playing field for the masses. He wanted to help with their social elevation and moral elevations. He also wanted to teach a set of values essential to citizenship in a democracy. What are those set of values? I bet you none of the school board candidates knows what Horace Mann's set of values, that's essential to citizenship in a democracy. Now, there's this historian that off of Wikipedia that said no one did more than he to establish in the minds of the American people the conception that education should be universal, non-sectarian, free, and that its aim should be social efficiency, civic virtue, and character rather than mere learning or the advancement of the education ends. So Horace Mann wasn't just saying, hey, we need education so, your kids aren't stupid. He was saying we need education to be universal and not just sectional. It should be all over the place, and it should be free. He said that the aim should be civic virtue. So again, there's that set of values essential to a citizenship in a democracy. My public education school didn't teach me any of the values that we need to learn to be a citizen in a democracy. It was a totalitarian system. There was zero democracy whatsoever. And in civics, there was no civics class. So we weren't talking about the political structure. We weren't talking about the three branches of government. We weren't, empowered to be all that we could be, at least not me and my education in northern Kentucky. So then even in, college, it was authoritarian in Xavier, University of Louisville, Spalding, Cumberland's. So rather than mere learning or advancement, so civic virtue, character, social efficiency, arguing that universal public education was the best way to turn unruly American children into disciplined, judicial, Republican citizens, Mann won widespread approval from moderate, even the Whigs. So the conservative Whig Party, they said, yes, let's build some public schools. Most states adopted a version of the system that Horace Mann established in Massachusetts, especially the program for normal schools to train professional teachers. Educational historians credit Horace Mann as the father of the common school movement. Okay, so there's a couple things here with this. Horace Mann got a lot of the ideas from Prussia, and that's why we have a Prussian industrial model form of education. So I'm not 100%, I don't love everything that Horace Mann did, but he was all about democracy. He was about teaching citizenship to the young Americans. Young Americans, you're going to be living in this, great democratic experiment, and you're going to need to know how to function, how to get by, how does, who runs things, and how does it run. So he wanted to turn unruly American children into disciplined, judicious Republican citizens. He wanted to teach a set of values essential to citizenship in a democracy. Turning the kids was the way you got the conservatives on board into these Republican citizens, teaching the democratic values. So we need to, the kids need to learn how our system works. The conservative Whig Party was in favor of that. And I would say that the conservatives and the liberals are all in favor of totalitarianism. Nobody's talking about teaching citizenship. Nobody's talking about teaching the kids to become judicious Republican citizens. Nobody's saying that. And then here's two quotes that Horace Mann says, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." So there's the ideal, humanity. Horace Mann is fighting for humanity. That's where universal education come from. Universal education, they got the approval from the Whig Party because it was going to teach the kids to become Republican citizens. They're going to learn a set of values essential to citizenship in a democracy. Here's another teacher who is attempting to teach without inspiring the pupil with a desire to learn is hammering on a cold iron. That is key. That is essential. This is something Margaret Wright will never understand. She will never get this. A teacher who tries to teach without inspiring the pupil with a desire to learn is hammering on a cold iron. You're not in favor of democracy, so you had Taylor Voss who says all education is experience, and that's Albert Einstein. And then he's in favor of discovery, for the kids to discover. Montessori was follow the child. They will teach you what they need. So follow the child, discovery, and, piquing their curiosity. That is so essential. Pique their curiosity, they'll want to learn calculus for the rest of their lives. Force calculus upon them, and they will hate you, and they will hate calculus for the rest of your life. You think you just did your trade a service? They hate calculus forever. Because another part that disappoints me about Margaret Wright is just that she seems so warm and kind and nice, and she would seem like she's a person who can empower others. But apparently, maybe that's a feminine trick, right? They come across as being pleasant, nice, delicate, and then men fall for that, and then they say, gotcha, and then they make you, they steal your labor. It's all about the authority and control. So it's, it's ironic, right? You would think she would be warm and would empower the students. She would be a good advocate for the students, but she, she's this consultant, but she doesn't know anything about the alternative educations or anything about educational theory. She can't answer basic, simple questions. She feels the need to filibuster and talk over you. She's the only person in the room, only her voice, only her opinion matters. John Dewey, he's a progressive that actually a lot of people were inspired about. And I'll be honest with John Dewey, he is very dense and confusing. And he wrote this book, Democracy and Education, and so that's a famous book, Democracy and Education. So he mentions democracy, but I don't know if he goes all full Sudbury. He doesn't go full Summerhill. And the reason why Summerhill believes in complete freedom, because if you give someone a little bit of freedom and you pretend that that was real freedom, they'll be manipulated forever. So you have to give them real freedom. That's how you live life. And then, there are guides by the side, there's libraries, and then the students have to clock in for 8 hours. That's a Sudbury model. So that's a pure democratic system. It only costs $7,000. $7,800 is how much money the public school system gives to the students of Pueblo for coming for a year, $7,800. And then Sudbury model is only $7,000. So Sudbury model is some things about John Dewey. He's one of the primary figures associated with the philosophy of pragmatism, considered one of the fathers of functional psychology. The overriding theme of Dewey's works is his profound belief in democracy. John Dewey is as American as apple pie. So he loves democracy, be it in politics, education, or communication, or journalism. Dewey himself stated in 1888, while still at the University of Michigan, democracy and the one ultimate ethical ideal of humanity are, to my mind, synonymous. So he loves humanity, and he loves, democracy, because democracy empowers humanity. To him, both of those ideals were one and the same. You love humanity, then you love democracy. Known for his advocacy of democracy, John Dewey considered two fundamental elements, schools and civil society, to be major topics needing attention: Reconstruction to encourage experimental intelligence and plurality. Dewey asserted that complete democracy was to be obtained not just by extending voting rights, but also by ensuring that there exists a fully formed public opinion accomplished by communication among citizens, experts, and politicians, with the latter being accountable for the policies they adopt. John Dewey continually argues that education and learning are social and interactive processes, and thus the school itself is a social institution through which social reform can and should take place. In addition, John Dewey believed that students thrive in an environment where they are allowed to experience and interact with the curriculum, and all students should have the opportunity to take part in their own learning. The ideas of democracy and social reform are continually discussed in John Dewey's writings on education. John Dewey makes a strong case for the importance of education, not only as a place to gain content knowledge, but also as a place to learn how to live. In John Dewey's eyes, the purpose of education should not revolve around the acquisition of John Dewey thought that the purpose of education should not revolve around the acquisition of a predetermined set of skills, but rather the realization of one's full potential and the ability to use those skills for the greater good. He notes that to prepare him for the future life means to give him command of himself. It means so to train him that he will have the full and ready use of all his capacities. Holy shit, that's flying, right? Isn't that what parents and educators are supposed to do for everybody? Roots and wings. That's what we need from the older generation. We need a foundation, and we need some wings. Roots and wings. Roots and wings. And yet, that's not what I'm hearing. That is not what I'm hearing from Dottie Calhoun. She said no. She thinks that's up to the parents. It's up to the parents. And I said 19 years is 13 years. But still, you're going to waste 13 years of everybody's kids' lives just so you can boss them around, and you don't give a shit if they succeed? That's what John Dewey, I'm liking everything I'm reading right now. So John Dewey is sitting there saying that they need to realize their full potential. They need to use those skills for the greater good. He's saying that the student needs to have command of themselves and to train them so that they can use, they have full and ready use of all their capacities by the time that they become adults. That's from Dewey's My Pedagogic Creed, 1897. In addition to helping students realize their full potential, John Dewey goes on to acknowledge that education and schooling are instrumental in creating social change and reform. John Dewey notes that education is a regulation of the process of coming to share in the social consciousness, and that the adjustment of individual activity on the basis of this social consciousness is the only sure method of social reconstruction. Democracy and Education, An Introduction to the Philosophy of Education, is a 1916 book by John Dewey. John Dewey sought to at once synthesize, criticize, and expand upon the democratic or proto-democratic educational philosophies of Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Plato. He saw Rousseau's philosophy as overemphasizing the individual, and Plato's philosophy as overemphasizing the society in which the individual lived. That's just like capitalism and communism. For Dewey, this distinction was largely a false one. Like George Herbert Mead and Lev Vygotsky, he changed the mind in its formation as a communal process. Thus, the individual is a meaningful concept only when regarded as an inextricable part of his or her society, and the society has no meaning apart from its realization in the lives of its individual members. As evidenced in his later experience in Nature, 1925, this practical element, learned by doing, arose from his subscription to the philosophical school of pragmatism. Learn by doing, education, Einstein. Everything else is information. Learning, all experience is education, everything else is information. That's Albert Einstein. Mark Twain says he never let his schooling interfere with his education. That's Mark Twain. That's who Taylor Voss, he says that he likes both of those educational theorists. Taylor Voss, hands down, is probably the best candidate like ever that Pueblo City has ever had, ever. He's a good, like, nice, cornbread Boy Scout, right? He's just a good guy, and he also wants to do things different. We're living in the 21st century, so why don't we start acting like it? And B.F. Skinner, I want to mention this. Noam Chomsky wrote a big, long thing against B.F. Skinner. Noam Chomsky is also an educational theorist. He's all about saying that education should be like a flower. So you don't just fill up a glass of education and then you're done, but you nurture education, and then you blossom into your full capacity. Vygotsky, Piaget, Sugata Mitra, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Noam Chomsky, William Glasser. I know a whole bunch of educational theorists, Tecumseh. So there's a ton of educational theorists out there. All teachers need to know educational theory, a theory of education. They need to know educational theorists. So, this is just incredible. None of the school board members, they don't know any educational theorists. Can teachers not become school board members? And then to not know John Dewey, to not know Horace Mann. Hey, who's the father of American education? You don't know? How or why are we going to trust you to be in charge of our kids again? You don't even know who started education, and why did he do that? Why did Horace Mann start education? Oh, yeah, to make Americans into good citizens. Oops, we failed on that front. Well, let's listen to John Dewey. Oh, we're not listening to John Dewey either.